and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. What is up, guys? Welcome. Hello. We have a wonderful guest on here with us today, and therefore I want to ask all of you a question because I feel like we've got a good difference in where everybody's from and backgrounds on the show today. And so I want to ask you, have any of you ever had the sandwich or the spread olive nut before?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Olive
think
nut
so.
loaf.
I don't think so.
Not olive loaf, olive nut. It's a
Okay,
cream
Does
maybe
that mean
not.
based spread.
it's olive paste and there's some nuts in there?
It's cream cheese with like
Wait a
chopped
minute,
up.
you're just looking for reasons to eat cream cheese again, Alexis.
Listen.
Yeah. The olive is,
Again.
this
You
is
need
my
a reason.
vegetable.
She drips
You
a
don't
drop
need a
of olive
reason,
juice on cream
but
cheese and then eats it.
It's a weird. I guess
I don't
it's
think I've had that. No, not what
really.
you're talking about. No.
I never had it until I came to Boyle County, and I was basically when I said, "What are you talking about?" I was gasped at by old Southern ladies, and but basically, it's like a cream cheese base with chopped up olives, like green or Greek olives, and nuts chopped up into it, and it sounds really
Like
weird,
walnuts, right?
Yes, I
It
believe
sounds
so.
Mediterranean, in fact. I don't know.
It sounds weird, but it is, and you put it on bread or crackers, and it's apparently a very Southern thing. And
What
now
did
I'm
you
obsessed
think
with it.
that she
Never
meant,
heard of it.
Ray?
Never heard of it.
Never heard. Yeah, I never heard of it either until I came to.
What did you
Danville.
think that she meant, Ray, when you said
more
yes?
of a fruitcakey type thing that I've had before. It was more. It's paste-like, but it was actually sliceable. It is not what Alexis
olive
is describing.
loaf type thing.
Yes, like a loaf.
Olive
But no,
nut
it's
bread.
not as heavy as what you're just. Yeah, sort of.
I don't know. An olive loaf sounds pretty heavy to me, but
It is. It has got a lot of cheese in it. But no, I've
He's
never
got to
had
lift
that.
with the knees.
Yeah, just live with it. I'm down for it if it's cheese, folks. But yeah, as much as I love cream cheese, I've never heard of that. So yeah.
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
definitely never heard of that
you
as
have
like a
stumped this
Southern
group.
thing. That's
Yeah,
like
no,
a New York
I think
deli
I've heard of
counter
it.
thing.
That
that's
does
what I
sound
would think
kinda
too.
New York,
Olives,
yeah.
but the all I know is the group of old Southern garden ladies. I was at like a garden clubby type thing where like shocked when I was like, I don't know what that is. Is it exactly what it sounds like? I don't.
Did you
I don't
offend?
know.
You might have offended them.
I did. I
with
think I
your
offended
lack
them
of
a little
knowledge.
bit.
Okay,
I think I
okay.
looked
Maybe it's
less
from
classy.
Southern Long Island.
I mean,
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
yeah.
I was thinking, I was like, is it Alabama?
Something
like,
you would put on a pastrami sandwich, maybe. I mean,
it would be good on a pastrami sandwich.
okay, is that a summer food though? Because I'm thinking about summer foods right now, and now I'm thinking about food in general.
Heavy cream cheese, of course. Summertime,
Yes, of course.
you get,
That's. I mean,
you get as many
Obviously, that's
mouthfuls
what you
as you
eat.
can,
Yeah.
and then you run back out into that
are
hot,
we-
humid heat.
we're all of a sudden talking about picnic foods, and I'm getting super excited and maybe a little loud. So I'm sorry. I apologize ahead of time. Nothing like sweaty olive, cream cheese on a picnic table at 98 degrees.
But it's also a little
perfect.
bit crunchy, and you're like,
Yeah, is that a fly or is that an ingredient? We don't know. It could be either. Yeah, no. This is something new. It sounds like it would be good on a wheat thin.
A wheat thin?
wheat
Yes, it would
thin,
be.
yeah.
Or on a little. It's like a little thing you would have next to your cucumber sandwiches,
Yeah,
or your
exactly.
like little,
on the
like
tray,
that's-
Yeah.
A small
like that.
aperitif.
Yeah.
Now, did they explain that to you, or you had to find it out by trying?
Yeah.
No, they
is
were
this
just like,
something you were
here's a
Googling?
cracker with olive nut on it, and I was like, okay. And when an old Southern woman tells you to eat something, you just do it. You don't ask questions. You eat it, and you're like, all right, I'm sorry, okay.
You don't want to cause a skirmish, and I'm using that word carefully. You don't want to
Just
cause
here.
a skirmish.
They make a plate for you, and you're done. So
Yes. Here, eat this. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Well-
garden clubs, they have good food anyhow.
Yeah,
From my
I mean, they
experience,
know
so.
what they're
Was it
doing,
good?
so.
Was it good?
it is good. I actually had it for lunch
Okay.
again today. There's a little deli in Lexington that has it, and I was like, I bet somebody else has heard of this, but apparently not. So
No, not enough.
Use promo code Alexis to get 10% off your next Olive Nut purchase.
Frequent flyer miles.
I wish.
Shout out to Olive Nut for sponsoring the episode.
Yes. Olive Nut family of brands.
Well, so anyways, to end this episode, it's go get yourself some olive nut, figure it out. But in the meantime, let me introduce our wonderful guest, who is, I'm just excited to have you on today, Arundathi Sharma. So she is the Extension Associate here at the University of Kentucky for Controlled Environments. And you've been doing a lot of cool stuff. And I call her a lot because I'm always like, hey, can I just like do something random? And she's like, well, and she walks me through how ridiculous I might sound with some of these weird ideas and her very different brain and how your brain works because you have an engineering background, right?
That's right. Yeah. I got into horticulture because I like food, basically.
Same.
Good reason.
Basically is the reason. But I'm an engineer by training. Yeah, I studied mechanical engineering, and I was very interested in robots and in bicycles. Worked on a little robot bicycle in college.
That's
Mm.
awesome.
But yeah, no, I wanted to do some food stuff, so I actually worked for a while on hydroponic systems and vertical farms. And that was a venture out into the, I guess I want to call it high tech because that's what the venture capitalists call it. But I don't know, maybe we'll talk a bit about this today. But I think I came away from that experience realizing that there's just so much that people can figure out on their own at home. And yeah, it was just kind of inspirational that you can, use a lot of the digital tools that we have at home, or even just stuff you have lying around and use it to make food.
Vertical farming,
Basically.
the bane of my existence, a little. Just like it was my master's research, so anything that's your master's research is going to be like give you nightmares still. But
Adjective.
it's nothing personal to vertical farming, but also I hate you. And you've seen some of these like high tech things, and then so now you're in Kentucky, and we kind of have a really big scope, and you would know this better than probably any of us. It's sort of the how high tech we have things here versus not. Can you talk to us a little bit about the scale that you've seen in our areas?
Yeah. Well, and so I also even just got to know Kentucky through the experience of visiting farms. So I feel like my understanding of Kentucky is very much through this lens of the range of types of
Yeah.
farms that are out here. But yeah, I mean, when people hear controlled environment ag, I think in Kentucky it really immediately pulls people's minds to high tech greenhouses.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, I don't know if we have like a thing here about saying names of places, but anyway, there was a
I
big,
don't know. We don't
big,
know either.
we don't know either. We might find out. Anyway, there was a company that had set up 4 huge high tech greenhouses in Kentucky, and that was really I think probably the entrance of like more automated
Mm-hmm.
operations here. But there have been pretty large scale greenhouses with various automation features around for a while. So there's pretty well developed operations like Bell Nurseries. They do a lot of transplants that go out to big box stores, for instance.
Mhm.
And those folks are really serving wholesale markets that may not even, you may not even encounter that product in Kentucky necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and then on the other side, you have just, literally, I think thousands of growers probably across the state that are using controlled environment techniques
Mm-hmm.
to grow already. Well, at least at UK horticulture, everyone loves to talk about the history of the father of plastic high tunnels.
Right.
Um,
No big deal.
uh, no big deal. Plastic greenhouses were invented in Kentucky. Don't forget about it.
By the way, get a
But
tattoo just right on your
by the
arm.
way, just a name. So there is a pretty long history of using, clear plastic actually to extend growing seasons. And so I like to talk about, coming from this sort of robotics perspective of automation means control.
Mm-hmm.
And there are
Mhm.
different types of control that you can have. So a lot of people mix up greenhouses and high tunnels
Mhm.
because they see the physical structure and they
Yeah.
think that looks like a greenhouse. The way that I would typically define a greenhouse, and I don't know that there's a universal definition for this, but to me, a greenhouse is something that's got active control. And active control means that there's something somewhere in your system that's monitoring conditions. And when a certain condition is met, some kind of machine kicks on and tries to
Interesting.
bring conditions back into spec. So, like a thermostat
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
a controller, so your house, assuming you all have a thermostat in your house, is a controlled
Just got
environment.
one the other day, but yeah.
I've just been feeding
Nice.
the fire all winter long.
Well, and in a sense, let's say you had a thermometer in your high tunnel and you just constantly went over there, checked the temperature, and then opened a door when the conditions were right. That is kind of active control. It's just a lot of work. And so we've seen a lot of really interesting ways that people get around, basically the not feasibility of doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so a lot of like kind of improvised stuff, I guess, to answer your question. People using stuff that they have lying around to either extend their growing season or reduce the amount of work that they have to do, all the way up to super automated, top of the line stuff that comes in from other countries, actually.
Mm.
I will tell you that the automatic roll up sides I have in my high tunnel was the best money I've ever spent. And I would do it 1,000 times over. And I tell everybody to do it. So here's your PSA. Everybody do it. It's the best thing I've ever done. So,
Can you briefly explain what that means,
oh,
Alexis?
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so high tunnels usually have a roll up side for you can allow for venting. So when it gets obviously it can get really warm in there, even in the dead of winter, it can be 20 degrees outside, and you can be if the sun's out 75 to 80 in the high tunnel, depending on the size you have and things like that. If the sun is out, but so I have a temperature sensor that drops down just a little wire that drops down into the middle of my tunnel from the rafters, and it checks the temp. And when it reaches a certain temperature in there, there's these tiny little motors that instead of me having to hand crank them up in the morning and in the evening, they'll go up and down based on temperature. And so they'll go up part of the way, and then it'll check the temperature after a few minutes. And if it's still too hot in there, it'll go up a little bit more, and so on and so on. And so I have those also on my greenhouse, which is basically looks like a mini high tunnel, but it has heat and vents and fans and stuff in it. So I don't ever, I mean, you still have to worry because, of course, motors can go out just like with anything.
Mm.
It's something to be concerned about. The wind is also something I stress about, but there is I do have the ability to add a wind sensor on. And so there's just like a little wind thing that'll sit outside the tunnel. And once it hits a certain speed, it will tell the curtains to go down. So that's my
Mm.
next upgrade that I'd like to have just because I don't work from home. And so I can't be there even when it's snowy outside and the temperature goes up, but it was, 25 degrees this morning, but the sun's out in the middle of the day. It's going to get hot in there really fast. And so I set those temps to go up and down based on ideal, ideal range. And I think that's really helped improve my crop. It extends the life. If I'm growing cool weather crops that don't like the heat, they're getting cooled off immediately. As soon as they get too hot, they're getting cooled off to, the best extent that I have. So it's phenomenal and worth every penny.
Mm. I kind of have a question about that when it comes to those tolerances for like
Mm-hmm.
at this temperature do this at
Mm-hmm.
and then test again. Does it come with like a pre-existing kind of template, I guess, or are you
Mm-mm.
putting
No,
all that logic together?
yeah, and it's very simple. Like by
Mhm.
logic, it's like I set the minimum temperature. So when it hits this, I want it to close, and when it hits this, I want it to open. And then I
Mhm.
sent the increments that I want it to check at. And so
Gotcha.
that's something like every 3 minutes I
Yeah,
want it
yeah.
to check or something like that. And then it has a little bit of a like a I forget the word I'm looking for, but I can add on a couple degrees lower, a couple degrees higher
Yeah, like the tolerance before it
tolerance.
triggers.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's just like a greenhouse. It's set up pretty much the same way. It's just only the sides are opening and closing on
Cool.
that. So really,
Yeah,
the
that
only thing I've ever worried about was the wind. If they're open and I know there's a storm coming through, I get stressed.
Hmm.
How do
So
you override that? Oh, sorry.
Oh,
uh,
you're fine. So I can just go in if I'm home and I know the wind's coming. Like we've had a lot of storms lately. I just go hit close, and it'll close, and so I can
Yeah.
manually open or close it, keep it open or close, or I can set it to check the temps.
Hmm.
Hmm.
do you? So I mean, this is making me, wonder as you've gained more experience and seen more sites and more applications. How do you square or how do you approach this spectrum? Because there's kind of like there is some. You mentioned some degree of control as kind of this uh, demarcation. Some people would say it's still just a high tunnel with some motors on it.
Hmm.
I
Right.
don't, I, and like, why do those distinctions matter? How do they matter in the work that you've been doing? And I'm just curious. But I'm talking about distinctions here for the audience. Distinctions between high tunnels and greenhouses, and even something like a low tunnel. You're controlling that little mini environment in a sense. And I'm just curious. I know there's funding reasons. There's technological cost share, whatever type reasons. There's other political and other reasons too. But what do you have to say about that? That's the spectrum that you're operating on.
Yeah, I think this distinction between passive and active control, and I don't even think I talked about what
Mm-mm.
passive control means, so I'll mention that first. I would describe something like a high tunnel or a low tunnel that doesn't have any of those add-ons that Alexis was talking about. Those are all passive systems where there is some kind of control in the sense that you're affecting the inside conditions to be different than the outside conditions. But you don't have an active control, meaning you don't have the ability to say, this is the actual condition I want, and we're going to hold it in this range.
Mm-hmm.
So this step where, Alexis has somewhere a temperature sensor that's actually telling the motors to kick on and lift up the sides, that's what makes it an active control system. Um,
Hmm.
and the reason that matters is because that stuff doesn't come for free, basically.
Mm-mm.
It costs money to put towards investing in that stuff. And then you have to make a calculation about, how quick is that going to pay off? So that can look
Hmm.
like a lot of different things for different folks. But in general, the trade-off when you go for one of these automated active systems is energy. So you're basically putting energy into your system. You either have an electricity cost or a fuel cost from gas or wood or whatever you might be using to heat, for instance, if you have a thermostat controlling your heating. That's the cost of having you know an active system versus a
Mm-hmm.
passive system. But that can pay off for a lot of people in terms of yield, in terms of resource use efficiency.
Hmm.
So, if in your case, Alexis, if you would be the person to have to go and manually roll up the sides
Mm-hmm.
just because you got a notification that the temperature got too high, there's a delay in that action,
Right.
and that is kind of an efficiency loss.
Mm-hmm.
So that stuff is all, very, very detailed stuff that most people don't necessarily care about, right? I think in your case, since you're not on the farm all the time, it makes a lot
Mm-hmm.
of sense to have that feature because the thing that you're saving, the most important thing of all, is your effort, your labor
Mm-hmm.
effort, and your ability to spend time on other things. Um, so the reason I encourage people to think about active versus passive control is to basically get people thinking about what their time and effort is worth next to the cost
Yeah.
of investing in that technology and also operating it.
Look at you having people think about paying themselves in some way or another because
Yeah.
farmers are the worst at that.
You made the
Small
absolute best
businesses
point.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to pay. You have to see a payback at some point. Arundathi, have you worked with very many folks yet where even before they have the first greenhouse on their operation, have you had the opportunity to work with people and work through that thinking process to say and ask them, why are you doing this? Why? Have you had that opportunity
Yeah,
much? I mean, to me,
I'm
that's like the
actually,
question.
that is really the question. And I think it's, ultimately, I think it's like the main question that we in Extension need to walk people through because everyone's case is going to be a little bit different. So that's, I think, what probably keeps this job kind of interesting. Even if the technologies are the same, it's never going to be a straightforward answer. Um,
Hmm.
but I do have this opportunity right now. I'm working on a project with a few different growers around the state. All of them are somehow interested in, well, so the group term for high tunnels plus greenhouses is protected ag. So
Mhm.
anything that's being grown under cover. All these folks are interested in protected ag, or they already have protected ag in their operations. But they're interested in having it either because they want to extend their season more, they want to expand, and they need to think about where their efforts are directed. Some of them are just trying to experiment. So my hope with this project, and actually just working closely with these folks to understand what it is they're doing right now.
Mhm.
So they're, logging information about um, what kinds of work they've been doing during the week, how much they've been working during the week. We're hoping that can tell us some things about what changes a greenhouse or a high tunnel might introduce. I think very often the situation people run into is they get a high tunnel or a greenhouse thinking, this is going to save me money, this is going to save me time. And they end up finding out that actually their effort is just redirected into something else. It's not it's not less work; it's different work.
I want to do that
um,
emoji is like laugh until, but then you start to cry. That's how I
the
feel
old
about that
song.
statement.
So that's really what we're trying to understand here in Kentucky. I think we mentioned this maybe before we started recording too, but there's just such a diversity of reasons that people get into it,
Mhm.
and a diversity of landscapes. You have a lot of folks in the eastern part of the state that are contending with just the challenges of the landscape itself, um, and seeing how and whether it can make sense to put in a tunnel. But having done that, it might enable them to be self-sufficient with their
Mhm.
groceries for a
Yeah.
longer part of the year, which is worth a lot. One of the neat things being here and learning a lot about just the history of agriculture here has been seeing all of these older tobacco greenhouses.
Mhm.
And this blew my mind, actually. Just that, people have been doing pretty low tech. I'm calling it low tech. That's not even a bad thing remotely.
No.
It's,
Easier to
if
fix.
anything,
Yeah.
one of my most important takeaways from engineering school was do it dumb.
Right.
uh,
Totally.
Love that.
it's usually better to just do stuff the straightforward way. So it was really cool to see that lots of folks have been doing hydroponics in Kentucky
Mhm.
in a low tech way for a very long time, and they've been doing it to grow transplants for the tobacco fields and have a head start on the season. So I think there is so much to be learned from what's already been innovated or developed here, and that it can be. I think it can be built upon to continue to be appropriate for this place and for the people.
Those old tobacco greenhouses are pretty wild. I've not been in a ton of them, but I know one flower grower who has one and has the old float bed, and that just the amount of heat captured by the water in that float bed, which if you're not familiar with like what a float bed is, it's basically it's just like a little pool, so to speak, of various sizes. This one's probably 10 feet by 5 feet, something along that. But the amount of heat that is trapped in that water, and it's lined with like a black rubber plastic type situation, keeps their greenhouse above freezing, and so they can grow some things in ground without having a heater. And I just think that's really cool, just the added heat where like my high tunnel is going to be a little bit colder because I don't have that water source just holding on to that heat that's released overnight. And so that was fascinating when I was like, wait, how are you growing this in here? And they said, oh, the float bed keeps everything warm. And I was like, what?
I
And
remember when
so
those
the
things first came, it was wild. It was Kentucky, it was a wild time in the state because nobody had used dist 4 meters or nobody had a concept of parts per million
Oh,
as
yeah.
far as fertility rates, and it was a time of trial and error there for the first 3 to 5 years, and it was like the wild wild west of greenhouse. And I never thought about it in those terms, but yeah, Alexis and Arundathi, it was. I remember those times. It was a lot of stress on agents as we try to get a handle on, setting some things in place, just like the basic stuff,
Mhm.
and what products you can and cannot use in the water, and just yeah, it was fun times, fun times, stressful even. But yeah, that's the first low. I guess I worked with a lot of those that were low tunnels. I guess I'd consider them now because the hoops were very small. The
Yeah.
very
Feel like you
first
could just
ones that
walk in
came.
them type
You
size,
could even
or
you couldn't even walk in them. A
okay, so
lot of
they were
those,
true, like, low.
like individual growers growing their own transplants, because before that you had in-ground tobacco beds, and so they adapted that concept of the spatial requirements for a tobacco bed, the rough dimensions. They said, "Oh, we're going to just add water and put a hoop over it."
Hmm.
So the first ones that I ever worked with, it was more common that they just be 3 or 4 feet off the water in Grant County. That's one of the first ones I ever worked with there in the northern part of the state. And yeah, it was interesting. But then they got more sophisticated, and in fact, got very sophisticated for the larger transplant growers, full blown
Mhm.
greenhouse operations. And it was pretty amazing there at the end that they were, fully compliant with like industry standard production methods. And it was pretty cool to see, the first float beds kind of morph over the years into, a larger operation at the apex of tobacco production in Kentucky. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's good stuff.
How were people making those developments? Did it come mostly through work with agents, you think, or were there sort of
Uh,
in presence
At,
or
at that time, I guess I'm dating myself a little bit. Not everyone
We already
had.
know you're from the 1800s. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, the late 1800s, early 1900s. Yeah, but yeah, cell phones were not. I mean, you didn't have connectivity in your pocket, so at that time, Extension was a little bit different type of organization in that we were a lot more informational based, and we had like paper publication. So, and a lot of that was just sort of trial and error. And Kentucky was leading the nation in production methods for that specific crop. But I mean, tobacco meetings then, whereas tobacco meeting now in a county, maybe, 50, 60 people, not even that. And
Mhm.
for the most part, they've gone by the wayside. But back then at a spring meeting, it was not uncommon to have 300 people.
Wow.
And they just would hold on to every single word. And I don't know if you guys have ever done any work on with things like capillary mats. We experimented with capillary
Mhm.
mats and gravity mats and all sorts of interesting things for plant production principles, in addition to hydroponic like float beds, very basic float beds. But for the most part, they relied on extension offices because when you got the information that spring, it was brand new information
Hmm.
that a quick trial had been put together, and the research information was somewhat vetted, but it still got
We
pushed
did
out.
this once and it didn't
Yeah.
fail
Yeah,
completely.
it didn't completely kill every single plant. So,
So, like, try
yeah.
it out. Let us
Yeah,
know.
there was a lot of reliance on, I guess, the extension service at that point, and information did not flow as freely as it did now. But it was just a different time, and it was exciting, but also terrifying. I remember because you didn't want to mess anything up, and if you got your fertility rates, I mean, this is at a time where glug glug didn't get it done as far as the rate and the water, and so that was a new concept for farmers at the time that were producing these transplants. It was just a different time, and so we had a lot of discussions on the need for precision of your solution that these things were growing in, and not a lot of people paid attention. There was a couple years with a lot of failures, and then people started paying attention. But that's sort of how it slowly just came about. But it was good times. But the information was just it was interesting to be a part of the information development.
Mhm.
That's what was neat for such an important industry, an agriculture industry for the state. Yeah.
Hmm.
yeah, I feel like this I mean, you mentioned precision. I think people think controlled environment means precision because it very
Mhm.
often is about keeping very tight tolerances, which,
Mm-hmm.
I guess in a way that is the long-term goal, but it doesn't mean that it's less controlled just because you have a wider range, you know.
Thank
Like
you. That makes me feel better.
yeah. So yeah, I guess very concretely, the system that Alexis described to me, I would say is it is a controlled, an actively controlled environment, and it's just not with the super high precision that you would have in your house, where your
Mhm.
AC will kick on if it gets too hot, and your heating will kick on if it's too cold, and
Mhm.
you can keep a very tight range. and it's hard to do that in a growing environment anyway. So it really is, I think, a lot of trial and error at the end, and it really is about understanding your own system.
Mhm.
Measuring lots of different places. You have all these microclimates in your
Mhm.
greenhouse. It's easy to convince yourself that, oh, I know exactly what's happening in here all the time. But in a way, the more information you have, the more you realize that there's lots of gaps in what you know. And yeah, you're just at the end just going through this process of understanding your own system well enough to be able to predict how to control it well.
It was interesting that you say that, and you worked with me on this particular case in my county, Arundathi. Um, it was the last, significant email string we traded back and forth, but people will stick with what they know. And I was working with a producer that's got several greenhouses now, and I was trying to slowly migrate them towards proportional injectors. And we had this whole discussion. Around a proportional injector, they can be pretty straightforward, but you can go down a rabbit hole with those with solution tanks and all of that fun stuff. And they were using more of an old fashioned type of injector, that like a PVC injector that was sort of homemade, but they knew that it worked to grow floral crops. They knew exactly how much of a given amount of fertilizer X that they had to get into their operation that week. And they would, put some food coloring in there. And when it turned clear, they had this method down that they had you know kind of designed over the course of several years, very very low tech, but it worked for them. They got a little spooked by the fact that, of changing injectors and everything, even though we're
Mhm.
still going to work with them on going in that direction in the future. I believe it's a good direction to go in, but they went back to the original production method this year just because that they knew that it worked. And I guess through trial and error, it works very well for them because they know their operation. They know which greenhouses are a little windier, which needs to be ventilated a little bit more, and it's going to pull more water that way. I mean, they know. And it's just through that trial and error where I'm over here like, no, no, we need to go, to these injectors. They're more precise. And they said, but we know that this works. So
Yeah.
there's always that push and pull. And I believe it's a smart thing, when your livelihood's at stake.
Mhm.
So I think what we're going to work with them on in the future is maybe trying that with one house, the new injectors that, they've been around forever, but it's a new process for them. So they're going to slowly change. And it's interesting that even people that are involved with greenhouses, they tend to be pretty progressive minded folks, I think, but they're still cautious when you throw new things in there. Do you see that any when you're talking about the new technology and monitoring systems and all this? Do you ever see that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. And in a lot of ways, it can feel like almost higher stakes when you have a greenhouse because it costs you money to,
Yeah.
put that
Yeah. That's
energy
it.
in, and
Every
it is
mistake
a
is magnified. It seems like
yeah,
if you kind of mess something up, you usually see that in certain situations pretty darn quickly. Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
For
definitely.
sure.
I wonder how much of it is just like I find myself starting to understand like my dad or older agents who used to be in my office who are just like, I don't want to learn something new. And it's as much as like as a millennial grew up with tech, love learning about that. Sometimes it's just like I don't have time or brain space to learn something new. And it will help. It's an improvement. You should do it. But it's like just the amount of overwhelming,
Yeah.
especially like in the season or you're trying to get started in the season, it can seem just very overwhelming to get new stuff. And so I think, you know, it's okay to stick with what you know if it is working.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't
And
have
usually that's the
to.
motivation to change is, something's went wrong if there's a motivation.
Right.
Like those folks are already extremely busy. Yeah, Alexis.
And
I
keep
feel
it
that for
simple,
them. Yeah.
stupid kind of thing.
Hmm.
Like,
Mhm.
don't
Yeah.
overdo it. I tend to
And
want
that
to overdo everything. I'm like, well, I need to put my whole greenhouse on solar. Obviously, that's what I need to do. And Rudy's like, do you though? Can you, as someone who you have helped through working through some different ideas, when people come to you and maybe they want to get started with protected ag, or maybe they want to update their passive protective ag to more active, kind of what those steps are that maybe if there's people listening should ask themselves like as they kind of get to that point.
Sure, yeah. I mean, of course, the first question you start with is why are you doing this?
Because I want
What is
to.
just because it's cool.
I'm a big
Someone told
Star
me I
Trek
should.
fan.
Yeah, I like technology.
And there certainly is a segment of folks that are just extremely serious hobbyists. And if you want to try something out, hell yeah, go for it. If you're not worried about potentially losing a lot of money, but chiefly the folks that I work with are commercial operations. So to some extent, the farm is a source of income for
Mhm.
them. So, the first question you have to ask yourself is why? And why is a business question more than anything
Mhm.
else. Are you trying to sell for longer in the season? Are you trying to reduce the amount of time you spend on a thing so that you can devote your energies elsewhere? Um, do you think that you're going to improve your quality? Are you trying to
Mhm.
grow a crop that you haven't grown before? There's a lot of different directions that it goes. And so I think really the key first thing to think about is how much is this going to affect the business?
Mhm.
Of course, I'm not necessarily obsessed with money, but if the idea is that this is going to be an improvement for the business somehow, I think it's important that people really understand why.
Mhm.
And speaking of doing upgrades and trying to encourage people to develop into certain technologies, I think there's a really great reason to stick with what you know, and it's that it's predictable, right?
Mhm.
And I think the best way to be able to move away from something that's maybe old and not working but known is to understand how it works and to
Mhm.
understand why it works. So if you have an old system in your greenhouse that's keeping your climate steady and you're kind of reluctant to switch to a new controller, it's worth understanding like, hey, what are the microclimates in this system that
Mhm.
are being set up, and how might that change if I, change my climate management strategy? If you would, for instance, go away from having roll-up sides and have a fully closed system and put in a different machine instead
Mhm.
to push air out of the tunnel, it would do something different to your
Mhm.
crops, almost definitely. And so understanding that impact starts with understanding what you already have. So I really encourage people to, yeah, understand why they're doing a thing and understand what it is that they already have,
Mhm.
so that they'll have a better feel for what the impact will be when they make a change.
Yeah, no,
That's
that's a
pretty vague.
no, I think that's good. I think from
But
like a horticulture plant person perspective, that's really important. The understanding what you have, because just like you said, that I would have initially thought about is okay, if you put in a different cooling system, yeah, your temperature ends up being the same, but that doesn't mean your plants are going to be affected the same because moving air, you know, across a plant in a different way is not always like a good thing, or it could be a good thing, or your humidity could increase even though your temperature is down. And so there are a lot of different growing perspectives to take into account if you change up a system that way, which is just added on to the pile of things to think about as you're as you're growing stuff. But you don't I think what you have taught me over our conversations just randomly throughout is you don't always have to have like the new shiny thing. The new shiny thing is great if you know how to use it and you know how it'll affect what you're doing. But like the why there, like, but Alexis, why? And I'm like, because I want to. And you're like, but why? And that was really helpful for me and just kind of like working through some situations. And I think would help a lot of people, even simply why cover why are you going to cover your crops with remay or whatever, a lot of the things that we've talked about. Why are you going to use
Mhm.
drip irrigation
Yeah.
if sprinklers have been working for you? um so
yeah,
Brett, did we
yeah,
miss
it
you a minute
is.
ago, Brett? Did you have a thought or comment? I didn't before we moved on, Brett. You were
Oh well, I mean, so yeah, my question was along the same lines, but it's from a different angle, sort of. Of so if you say why to a grower, like why do they want to implement it? That's one thing. It's an important part of it. But I think the other question I have is why should someone consider doing it? Like, what are the
mhm,
actual compelling reasons for considering this technology? Why are there organizations and companies and others that are actively and seemingly actively encouraging people to get into this? and I'm not trying to get to the bottom of a conspiracy theory. I just mean, we have
Typical.
listeners who are not not as initiated into some of the horticulture stuff, and so I think even just a sense of like what's the point of this? Why is there something about the year 2024? Is there something about, you talked a little bit about geography, but what is it about this technology that is particularly useful for our modern times?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I came from industry scene where I think there were a lot of shiny new agriculture toys being sold around, and very
Mhm.
often I think they tend to be suitable for larger operations in my experience. And coming to Kentucky has been um, a, a really interesting time of seeing a lot of very productive farms that are happening on a small scale with, one person doing all the work.
Mhm.
And they're doing it next to their whole other lives and maybe even other jobs. So, I think a lot of tech solutions that are sold in agriculture are kind of about, improving sustainability or improving labor use, or they're kind of trying to fill a need that they think growers maybe have.
Mhm.
But what I've kind of started to understand here is that everybody's case is really very different. And people are in it for very different reasons. And I don't think everybody that is farming is necessarily looking to not have to farm,
Mhm.
if that makes
Right.
sense. Um,
Which makes your job
so,
super easy.
yeah. So yeah, I think there is definitely, people see agriculture as a market. Farmers are always going to be around as long as people have food needs, and so it's sort of seen as a sector that can benefit from a lot of improvement. It's seen as a sector that has a lot of climate impact associated with it, for instance,
Mhm.
or resource use impact. And I think a lot of burden sort of gets automatically placed on growers to buy more efficient stuff, change your practices, do this and that. And um, you know in a scene where a lot of people are anyway in a position of having to fix their own equipment that they
Mhm.
use on their farm, I think it makes a lot more sense to develop resources that'll allow people to make those kinds of positive changes, but in a way that's achievable for them and
Mhm.
accessible, and that allows them to hold on to some of that autonomy
Hmm.
in a time where a lot of things are just becoming more and more digital.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Arundathi
Right.
Sharma, right to repair. Boom. Said it
Yes.
oh
here
Right.
first.
yeah.
Right.
Hey, it's a big deal. I mean, the software, you may have the hardware, but if they've
Yeah.
got your software, if you don't have full control of integrated software and hardware, then not good. Not good.
I say that jokingly, but I'm a
Yeah.
big advocate of right to repair and across
Mhm.
different. That's part of what you're talking about is this difference between like who controls the right to decide whether a product continues being used or has to be purchased and replaced, or yeah.
Right. Or if
A
Yeah,
you're
lot of
having
it.
to pay a subscription of some kind in order
Mhm.
to keep this automation.
To keep
Yeah.
software
exactly.
updated.
Well,
Maybe we're talking about the observe and create crowd. With greenhouses, and that's the entrepreneurs, the innovators out there. They go and look at these trade shows, and then they go back and recreate it somehow
Yeah.
on a lower level themselves. The observe and
Right.
create
Right.
bunch.
Super
They're the ones I'm
glue.
there for. Yes, we can
Reverse
make that.
engineering.
The makers, the
reverse
true
engineering.
makers. Yeah, there you
Well,
go.
and one of the other reasons that I kind of like to encourage people to look at sort of homemade automation solutions, whether it's like, oh, I bought like a little Raspberry Pi and I'm going to have it control
Hmm.
some little smaller components in my greenhouse. Like, I think people should go ahead and try that out. um, and part of the reason for that is, I mean, it might not seem like that now, but the internet has a long history of hosting a lot of very open source fix it
Yeah.
yourself kind of communities.
Oh yeah,
And indeed, it's also a host for a lot of information and a lot of YouTube videos that people use to
Yeah.
fix their analog equipment too.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, so I really like to, yeah, encourage people to understand how digital tools work as well, so that it doesn't
Mhm.
have to feel like every time something moves over to an app, or every time
Mhm.
something, stops being, I don't know, run with gears and
Yeah.
and levers, that they're losing control of it. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be like that.
Where would I go if I'm wanting to kind of get started in some very basic, temperature control, some of those really simple things, like what we've talked about? Is there a good resource you recommend for people to look at?
I think a lot of, when people get started with some sort of simple programs, they'll use like an Arduino, little little kind of microcontrollers that actually I think a lot of kids even learn how to use a little bit in school these
Mhm.
days.
Mhm.
And they have lots of just pre-made templates. They have a lot of sensors that are already meant to work with that environment, and so it's not
Mhm.
the sort of thing where you should have to feel like you need tons of programming knowledge or something
Mhm.
to interact with. But you can have this, just this experience of seeing, okay, I wrote a thing here and I can have it print out to me a temperature reading that came off of this little sensor that's next to my computer.
Mhm.
That's the first step, is being able to collect measurements, collect data. And then the next step is thinking about, how do I want my system to react to that information?
Mhm.
And that, in a lot of ways, is kind of the hard part, but it's the part that people already are doing every time they make decisions on the farm. Is they're asking themselves, okay, is it too cold outside for
Mhm.
me to or
Open
rather,
the
is it too
sides,
hot
yeah.
outside for me not to have the sides raised, or is it too windy
Mhm.
for me not to? Just to take the example that you gave, that is a decision that you're taking yourself every time. And so the hard part is, in a way, coming up with a systematic logic for that you can tell the program to follow.
Mhm.
But that would be a place to start. And in general, when people have questions about, hey, this thing in my program doesn't work, Stack Exchange, just any kind of like online forum,
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
a great source for that. Josh probably has, millions of these stored somewhere.
That's the move, is to basically just type exactly what is happening to you in one really long search. And then you get
Boolean
to know
search.
those sites like Stack Exchange, where it's like, oh yeah, because I guarantee you, no matter how like creative and unique you think you are, 6,000 people have already had your exact problem.
Yeah.
You just gotta
uh,
find that user group.
that reminds me to
Josh, you sound like
mention
my mom when I was in high school and struggling.
You're not special.
you're not special.
Six
Um,
thousand people have had this problem.
Mhm.
that
Oh,
reminds
thanks,
me of a
mom.
resource that we should put down in the show notes that Josh has actually worked on for high tunnels, and it was temperatures, so kind of minimum, maximum, ideal
Oh
temperatures
yeah.
for crops. Yeah, you wrote it for crops in a high tunnel throughout, and you've got one for kind of every region of the state, right, Josh?
Yeah, but of course the temperatures don't change, right?
Right,
But
right. The
yeah,
temps don't change,
it
but
has the like minimum and then like the optimal.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
But it's like it gives you your range and then like your
Like
optimum. And that,
min-max optimal.
yeah,
So
that's
if
a
you're
really good
wanting
reference.
to grow a new crop and say you're a high tunnel, maybe you've been keeping, I went and got a little sensor from like Ace Hardware that like gave me 24 hours, like the past 24-hour highs and lows. I mean, just it was like
Ooh.
$5. And so you can do something
Mhm.
as simple as that. And so if you're looking to, say, okay, what is my tunnel already doing or my greenhouse already doing? What do I need it to do based on these, Swiss chart has an optimal temperature of 65 degrees. I don't actually know. I made that up. You can take that information and then set, sensors moving forward based on, kind of info that's on the internet, at UK's websites, on the internet, or at your local county extension office, which you can call if you're in Kentucky. You have one. Every county does. If you're not in Kentucky, I'm sorry, but you also have an extension university if you're in the United States. So you can call them.
Well, we'll definitely put a link to that.
Yeah.
What the resource that this appears on is the High Tunnel planting day calendars, and it's like a reference document that
Mhm.
when and what part of the state you're in. But every one of them has the same list of a bunch of different crops and crop families, and it shows kind of sometimes there's crop groups. So I can't remember exactly how many crops you can reference on this
It's a lot.
document. Yeah, it's over 30, I want to
Mhm.
say, but it gives you like the minimum and the optimal temperature range for all of them.
So there's
There's
some
a
info
couple
for you.
couple of the things that Arundathi mentioned in passing that if you want to look into them a little bit more, one is Raspberry Pi, so it's like the fruit, and
Yeah,
then pi like the number,
Yeah, I
like
don't know what
the
that
cool
is.
I
number.
like pie.
Those are awesome.
yeah. And then the other one was Arduino, Arduino. There's pretty robust communities of people for both of those. But those are just like platforms and technologies you can use to get into DIY automation and electronic programming of different sorts with other people who did not go to computer engineering school or wherever. It's
Right.
very like there is a really excited, and you could do, there's applications in agriculture, but like I would say the overwhelming majority are not agricultural applications that you'll find. It's a lot of it can be kind of goofy and fun stuff like programming. I've seen people program like the scrolling, like you see a sign that has a scrolling banner on it, but they'll like
Mhm.
program those for their house and be able to like have those in their front, like in the, I don't know, that was one of them that I remember seeing. But you could have it like theoretically have it turn your lights off and on, that kind of thing. It's
Mhm.
like those open source DIY platforms. But if you're a Googler or an explorer like me and you didn't quite catch, or Arduino, I remember not knowing how to spell it for a long time. But yeah, those are a couple of the spots you might check out.
Sweet. All right, Rudy. One final question. What is the weirdest or coolest or most random thing you have seen a grower like fix or make up to make something work? Because I'm sure you've seen some wild, very clever, but very duct taped central, which no judgment on that. I'm just saying, is there like something that sticks out to you?
I don't know if I mean your description makes it sound so hacky.
No, I mean hacky in the best
But
possible way.
Engineered.
yeah,
Let's
yeah,
say ad hoc engineering.
If
ad
you could
hoc,
make something
yeah,
Think of
interesting,
it as
yeah,
maybe
that's
bespoke.
right.
Yeah.
bespoke.
Folksy
Um,
engineering.
Folksy. I like
uh,
folksy,
Folksy engineering.
I've seen it's really not even that weird at all.
but
But the thing that
impressive,
comes to
maybe.
mind because I was impressed by it, or because I thought like, hey, like everybody should have that, kind of
Hmm.
relates to what you said about the float bed. I saw somebody that set up just like a water heater boiler or water
Hmm.
boiler kind of heat setup, and they had pipes running all through their greenhouse, and that was just like the
Mm.
more efficient
Hmm.
way to heat their greenhouse. But they just found that thing. There was one brother who was a plumber. There was another one who was an electrician, and
Oh wow.
they got
Well,
that going.
Yeah.
Uh,
Match made in heaven.
yeah.
yeah, but
I've
they
One
had
always
brother was a candlestick maker.
yeah.
there was the
Horticulturist, I feel like you would think I would know how to grow things really well, but really I kind of wish I was a plumber or an electrician. I feel like I could
No
figure
joke.
out the plant knowledge. The plumbing and electrician part of it is the struggle for me. I'm like, oh, I can tell you all about soil microbiology. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's great. But also,
Right. Is this pipe fitting going to hold when
is
I
the
turn
pipe
the
fitting
line
going to
back on?
hold?
I mean, it's mostly about even growing plants is mostly about moving water to the right
Hmm.
places and like
Mhm.
ions exchanging with each other. So it really is kind of electricity and
It's just
plumbing.
chemistry, baby. It's just chemistry.
Mm.
it really is.
Awesome. All right. Any final words? Anything you want people to know before we kind of get out of here?
I think with digital stuff, I mean, we talked about a bunch about getting into some of these more like hobbyist level do it yourself controls that you can set up. I think it can be easy to get discouraged with that stuff. I certainly have gotten like stressed out about it in the past. You're like not finding anybody quite doing exactly what you're doing
Hmm.
in the forums on the internet, and it can feel really discouraging. And I would really encourage people not to get like, yeah, don't feel hopeless about it, and reach out to me. I'm happy to help you troubleshoot your little coats. And and yeah, I would really encourage people to not be scared of trying to fix some of that stuff. It's a matter of just understanding how it works. At the end, everything will be somewhere in it, kind of an analog piece. So
I can say, as a plant person, I very much appreciate your engineer brain and how valuable the way you think about things is to like the horticulture department and UK extension. I just feel like the way you look at things is so valuable because we can get caught up in the planty world and get stuck, I think, sometimes. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for being you
well,
and being amazing.
well, thank you for having me. I am so happy to get to hang out with this great group of people. More importantly, uh,
Well, we're all just kind of
No
talking.
problem.
She's looking at us
Anytime.
like they're builder makers for sure.
I
Yeah, they
speak for
make
all of
stuff
us when I
because they
say you're
can.
welcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, definitely check out the show notes for more information. Those publications we talked about. We'll throw Arundathi under the bus and put her info in there as well, so you can find her wherever you are. And of course, you can always reach out to us at our email, which is also in the show notes. You can reach out to us there. We've had a couple people lately do that, just asking questions. What's wrong with my cabbage, or does this tree look okay? And that's all right to send those to us too. Or if you have ideas for shows, we always appreciate that. We get some great ones out of there. So thank you. You can follow us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast. You can send us messages on there. If you're a social person rather than an email person, that's okay. We understand. So you can shoot us that there. Leave us a review if you're so inclined. If you're like, have Arundathi back because she's awesome and you want to know more about controlled environments, we can certainly do that. Just drop us that in a review. But that's all. Thank you for being with us today. And we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us. Have a great one.